La da 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 da, la da 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 da. Dance with me, Daddy, dance with me, Daddy. When I was a little girl, very little, we lived in a great big old house. It was my play place. I was sure it had 100 rooms. And my brothers and my sister and I used to play in every corner we could find. We had secret places. We had hidey holes. And sometimes we tried different adventures in the house to just see how far we could stretch our limits. My brother Chuck was famous for that. One time he suggested that maybe we ought to take the wooden toboggan and go down the long, curving staircase. So we started up at the top, and he yelled out, "Geronimo!" Ka-choo, 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 ka-choo. Down we went. We hit the bottom and slid across the floor and right into my mother's antique table. I still remember the steam coming out her ears. Another time, and actually the best times, I remember my father. In the evenings, we'd be in our playroom playing, and be near dinner time. Mom would be in the kitchen fixing dinner, and I'd wait for that sound of the door opening and Dad sticking his head in, "Daddy's home!" And we'd all run to the door and like monkeys try and climb up him. Well, he would say, hold on, just a minute. And he'd take his hat and he'd hang it on the rack and he'd unbutton his coat, this long camel hair coat, and he'd take it off, and he'd hang it on the rack. And then he'd get down to where we could all reach him, and we'd all climb all over him. I was always trying to reach for his neck. Sometimes I had to step on my younger brother, but that's how it is. Well, then my mother would say, "All right, children, back into the playroom." And off we would go, and Mom would finish preparing supper, but Dad would go into the living room, and he'd sit down in his easy chair. And in the playroom, I used to get as close as I could to the door so I could hear. And I can still remember, as my father sat down in his easy chair and opened up the paper, I could hear the crinkle of the newspaper. And then he would pick up his pipe and put it in his mouth and light it, and that sweet sticky smell of smoke that would come. And then he'd take it out of his mouth and set it in the ashtray and make a little clink sound. And he'd pick the paper up again and turn the page. Pretty soon Mom would say, "All right, dinner's ready, everybody." And we'd all gather into the dining room. There were 5 kids then, so 3 on one side, 2 on the other. Dad at the head of the table, Mom at the foot of the table. We'd say grace. And then we'd have our food. Now my father, he loved to learn. And he was always practicing new words and trying to get us to learn new words. A lot of times he'd make us get the encyclopedia out or the dictionary. We thought that was really boring. But one time my father was saying something about archaeology. And I thought that was a pretty interesting word for a little girl. It's a big word. And I said, "Daddy, what does archaeology mean?" He said, "Well, honey," he's trying to think how to say it to a little girl. He said, "Honey," he said, "archaeology is when you take little shovels and you dig in the earth for old-timey civilizations." You know, that reminds me, it wouldn't surprise me, you know, the Ojibwe people, the Indians used to live all along where this house used to, you know, before this house stood. It wouldn't surprise me a bit if there was an Indian village right under this house. Well, I could hardly wait for dinner to be over, and my brother Chuck sensed that something was up, and he goes, what? Nothing. And Father stood up from the table, and he said, "All right, children, help your mother with the dishes," and he went back into the living room. And I scooted out through the kitchen after I did my chores, and went out into the backyard. I went to the sandbox, and you can guess what I was going for, my little shovel. And I got back to the house as close as I could. Happened to be my mother's flower bed. oh wow. And I started to dig, and after a while, I had a pretty good sized hole going, and I was really excited because I could just picture this whole Indian village under the house intact. And I could picture, moccasins and tomahawks, and oh my gosh, Princess Summer, Winter, Fall, and Spring. And so I'm digging away, and I feel this big shadow over me. And I look up, and it's my father. And he said, "What are you doing?" Looking for Indian treasure? And he started to laugh, and he laughed, and he laughed. And then he said, "You know what, Sheila Ann, if you're not careful, you're going to dig all the way to China." Well, that's how my father was. Sometimes he was a busy man with his business. He had a manufacturing plant, and it was growing in the early days when I was quite young. But the evenings I liked best. They were the ones after dinner, and Dad had gone back to the living room, and he was in his easy chair, and we were playing, and I would wait until no one noticed me. That wasn't hard when you're a big family. And I would get as close as I could to the playroom, and then when I was sure no one was watching me, I would go into the living room and go up to his chair, and I'd look up at him, and I'd say, "Dance me, Daddy, dance me, Daddy." And he'd look down, and he'd give me that big toothy grin that he had, and he'd push himself up out of the chair, and he'd step out. And he'd put his hands out like this, and I'd step lightly onto his shoes, and he'd start up a little tune. La da 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 da. And then he'd speed up to see if I could stay on. But I never fell off. I watched his face, because it always changed when he was about to pick up his speed. And I felt his feet beneath my feet, and I knew that I was going to stay on, and I did. And we did that lots of times. I would go in, "Dance me, Daddy," and he would get up, and we'd dance around the room. It was my special time with my father, and I loved it. I adored my father. And when I was looking up at him and he was looking at me, I had his full attention. He knew it and I knew it. It was a magic moment for me. La da da dum ba dum ba dum ba dum ba dum. "Mommy, I don't want to move. I want this house. I like this house. This is my play place." My mother said, "I'm sorry, Sheila, but we have to. The house is just getting too big." "What do you mean? It's the same size it's ever been." "Well, what I mean is, we've got another baby coming, and it's just too hard to keep cleaning and taking care of all you kids. We're going to move into a smaller house. It'll be better. You'll like it. And you'll be closer to school. You know, you're starting school next year. And I'll have more time with you." Well, it wasn't better. In fact, we were so squished into this little tiny house, a little 3-bedroom ranch out in the project somewhere, and we were so squeezed in that when my father, who no longer had a living room, that was our playroom, he created this little tiny den. And in the den, he moved all of his books in that he'd had before in the living room, so the books were lining the wall. And he had his easy chair. But the door was often closed. Now, when he came home, we'd all climb on top of him just like before. But then he'd go in to his den, and he'd close the door. And I can remember being outside and listening for the sounds of the crinkle of the newspaper. "Daddy, Daddy." But when I did that, my mother almost always came over and she said, "Sheila Ann, you leave your father alone. Give him some peace and quiet." And so that's how it was. Dad and I didn't dance anymore. But in the evenings, when we were all ready for bed and in our zippy duckies, he'd open the door of the den and we'd go in and he'd read aloud to us. Oh, I loved that part. He would often take the voices in the stories. Make way for ducklings, Mr. and Mrs. Mallard with their 7-duck family, Quack and Lack and Mack, and so on. And he would say when they had to move the whole family from Central Park, and there was a police officer that officiated, "Halt! Make way for ducklings." Quack, quack, would go my father, and we'd all laugh. And that was Dad. He taught us to love books, and to love learning, and to love words. La-dum, ba-dum, ba-da, la-dum, da-dum, da-da-dum, da-da-dum. Time went on. I got through elementary school, I endured high school, and I went off to college. Now, during that time, there were some flashbulb memories of my dad that were kind of special. He had this quirky way about him. You know, you never quite knew for sure. Oh, here's an example. When I was in my first year of college, now he loved photography, that was one of his hobbies. So it was very near my birthday. In fact, it was the day before my birthday, and I got this package in the mail. It was an Instamatic camera. Now, most of you know iPhones, but think about this as the iPhone of that time. It was a very cool thing. And so I got on the phone and I called my dad and I said, "Dad, thanks for the camera. Thanks for the birthday present." No, I said, and he said, "What birthday?" I said, "Well, tomorrow's my birthday." Oh, yeah, I hadn't realized that. So you like the camera, do you? Yeah, I like the camera, Dad, thanks. And that's how he was. He didn't always remember my birthday, but he remembered me. And that was the part that mattered, I guess, if you had to choose. Well, another time, I said to my dad, "Dad, I know what I want to do with my life." "Oh yeah, what do you want to do?" "Dad, I want to be a writer, a poet, in fact." He said, "No, I think you should be a teacher." Well, I became a teacher. I graduated from college, and after that, well, I got my first teaching job. I found out I liked teaching. But I also found out there were some things about teaching that I didn't like. The way kids had to learn, rote memorization, workbooks and textbooks. It seemed to me there was a better way to do it. I mean, when we were at home and talking about ideas, it seemed like it was okay. So then, a thing happened that kind of surprised me. I didn't see it coming. I got a pink slip in my mailbox. Now, for those of you that know what that is, for those of you that don't, that's a sign that you are being laid off as a teacher. So I was a laid-off teacher, and I went back to school, doing the thing I love to do, and that was learn more. And while I was there, something happened that changed my life. There was a little poster outside the classroom door where I was taking a class, and it said that a storyteller was coming to town. Now, I was a scholar then. I was working on my graduate work, and I was doing research in children's literature. And this guy was going to tell me stories? Maybe not. I mean, after all, I was beyond that. But I didn't have anything else to do, and it did sound kind of interesting, so I decided to show up. And that night, in a room filled with people of all ages, there was a bare stage, and a man stepped out with baggy pants, Coke bottle thick glasses, and he began to tell stories without any props or anything, and I was transported. In that moment, I knew I had to be a storyteller, and I did become a storyteller. Now, I took it back into the classroom, and I showed teachers how to use it. And in fact, I, one time, was standing there giving a presentation when a woman came up to me, and she had a coat wrapped on her arm very carefully. And at the end of it, she stepped up to me and she said, I just have to talk to you. You're Jim Daly's daughter, aren't you? I said, "Yeah." "Well, I owe your father everything. I'm sorry, I heard he passed away a few years ago." Yeah, it was pretty sudden, a massive heart attack." What do you mean, you owe my father everything?" "He paid my way through school." Well, after she left, I learned the whole story. He had helped that family because they had no money, and she had a signed promise, and so he paid for her schooling. I had no idea. I walked back and forth trying to figure this out. And then I realized, oh my gosh, it was not his business, not his manufacturing company, not being a success. It was education that mattered to my father. I remembered all the things that he taught me and all the ideas that he taught me. And I realized my whole life was about education. In that moment, I knew that I was still dancing on my father's shoes. And in that moment, it was such a big thought to me and such a bigger world that I stepped into because of that. And when you step into your unfolding story fully and you embrace it, an energy, a surge will come on. And that's what happened. In that moment, I knew that it was about education, real education, where ideas mattered, where there was creativity and imagination that could come into play. Time went on, and I got married, and my husband and I formed a nonprofit to bring education to developing nations. We have 5 schools in Africa. We created a curriculum that's a story-based curriculum for the elementary years. But the best part of this is that one time, when I was with our partner in Africa, I saw a picture of some of the school children in one of the schools that we served. And I saw a little boy just like that. And I said, who is that boy? And our partner said, well, he's a homeless boy. That his family has thrown him out. He shows up at the school. We don't know what to do. I said, well, he's only 4 or 5. I mean, how can you, why would he be thrown out? Well, too many mouths to feed. So I arranged for his care and I arranged for his education. And I made sure that he got lots of good books to read. He's 14 now. And the villagers call him Omo Sheila. Now he has his own name, but Omo Sheila means Sheila's son. So I'm his American mama. So you see, I'm still dancing on my father's shoes. Each of you has an unfolding story. And when you discover it and step into it, you will know yourself to be the sacred and beautiful and absolutely unique and unrepeatable person that you are. And when you do step into that unfolding story, it's like stepping into a river and you start swimming downstream instead of trying to swim upstream. Life gets easier. And in that stream, you end up in a place where all your dreams are. And when you do end up in that place, you will know yourself to be the treasure that you are.